Hey everyone, welcome to the Them Before Us podcast. I am your host, training director Jen Friesen, and today we're joined by our engagement director, patient Sunny, and we have a special guest, Dr. Naomi Whittaker. Hey ladies, thanks for being here.
Jen, it's great to be here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Dr. Whittaker is the founder of rrmacademy.org and is an OB-GYN fertility surgeon focused on women's restorative reproductive medicine, compassionate healthcare, and education. Dr. Whittaker is a board-certified OB-GYN and a fellowship-trained surgeon who specializes in the Creighton model fertility care system and NAPRO technology, which works cooperatively with a woman's body to treat the underlying cause of genealogic, I hope I'm saying these right, issues and infertility, such as endometriosis and PCOS. So Dr. Whittaker, thanks so much for joining us for this. This is in our IVF series. And those were a bunch of words I barely even know what they mean. So we're so glad that you're coming on to talk about your work, just help educate our listeners. And Patience is going to join me just in asking you questions and helping our folks know who you are and what you do. So thanks so much for being here. Yeah. What word did I say wrong there?
Gynecologic.
Oh, gynecologic. Yeah. Like gynecologist. I knew the root, but then I just went a different direction with it. Well, we'd love to just hear a little bit of your background, how you got started in the field of medicine that you practice, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So since I was really young, I wanted to become a physician. I really wanted to address the mind, body, soul, and the whole family unit aspects of healing. So I was really drawn to be a healer. And so I went to medical school. And during medical school, I became a mother. And during that experience, I had less than compassionate care through that process. And then just a few months later, I did my OB-GYN rotation, and I realized I wasn't alone with the less than optimal care that women's health brings. And I saw it over and over, just kind of a lot of callousness and cookie cutter approaches. And then I was at Creighton Medical School actually for my training, and that's where this whole system was developed actually. So I accidentally stumbled upon that because I was at that medical school. And so I saw a contrast between two different approaches, kind of the regular approach, cookie cutter, and again, it just kind of reflected back to my experience, seeing what was happening to others. And it hit home for me. It really felt like I could feel what they were going through, and I could really empathize with that experience. And I really wanted better. I wanted more compassion, both for the woman and her unborn child, just to really respect both patients. And so as I was going through my rotations, I saw, okay, here you drive up to the women's health menu and you get either, option A, B, or C, IUD, birth control, or, pills or whatever else on the menu, versus the NAPRO physicians I was training under. They had people flying in from all over the world to get this very unique care that was individualized to them, very complicated surgeries and workups. And I just saw such an interest. It was just so interesting. I also was really bored by that ABC menu versus we're going to combine the really complicated endocrine system and the complicated surgical system to find all these things and correct them and heal women and really, it transformed them. And it's this unique care that is not done. People are flying in from literally around the world. People from Poland. I remember someone from Poland, and I'm from Poland. My parents are from Poland. So that really, really impacted me. And I originally was like, oh man, that's going to be a lot. I don't know if I want to do that. But again, I thought, well, if I'm going to be away from my family, doing this work, because I had just become a mother, and then I was like, oh, do I really want to commit to this OB-GYN field that's known to be extremely demanding? Or should I just look into something like dermatology, just do a, 9 to 1, 3 days a week? But then I thought, if I'm going to be away, I want to really do something impactful and different. And so that's really what convinced me to do this kind of work.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. For our listeners who may not be familiar with NAPRO, restorative reproductive medicine, can you just give an overview of what that approach is? Sometimes people hear that it involves cycle charting and their mind immediately goes to the rhythm method and they're like, oh, that's that crazy thing that my grandma did for birth control and she had 8 kids. Or, sometimes it's a couple that has been struggling with infertility and they hear that and it makes them think of the times that they've been told that, oh, just relax, stop stressing about it, go on vacation, and it'll happen. So for our listeners, just what does that approach really entail? What's going on there?
Sure. So in the 60s, when the birth control pill was invented, advancement in women's health kind of stopped. Everything turned into, here's the pill for this, here's the pill for that. Same thing happened when IVF was invented. Oh, you have infertility, here's IVF. So there was a subgroup of people that weren't happy with that approach, that wanted something else. And so Dr. Hildreth, who developed the system, he had women who were charting their cycles formally with instruction, and the ones that came to him who were avoiding pregnancy and not having issues conceiving had a normal looking chart. And then the women who came to him with issues getting pregnant had a very abnormal cycle chart. And so he kind of changed the system a little bit to make it a little more scientific and objective, how they wrote down their symptoms. And so this objective data is very scientific now, and it can be used for research. It can be used for an individual workup and evaluation, and it can be used for targeted testing and treatment as well. So it's actually a very advanced way of seeing what's going on, starting with the cycle chart and building upon that. Now, the reason why the pill, one reason why the pill and IVF kind of stunted the growth and development of women's health is that we have blinders on as to what is going on in the women's cycle. So most OB-GYNs don't really understand the whole physiology actually of the women's cycle. I learned more about the women's cycle in my 1-hour introductory session to the Creighton model system, which is a formal instruction of the Creighton model system. I learned more about the physiology in that session than I did in medical school or in my residency. So that's a big problem. So we have blinders on. So we don't know, and most of physicians and healthcare does not understand the women's cycle. So the key event of the women's cycle is ovulation. And so we can't really do good research or treatments that are individualized without truly understanding that cycle. So by truly using scientific data, which show what hormones are doing, the fertile window, and what is normal, we can run tests and treatment based on that, and that improves research. So we can use that to restore health. We took the blinders off. We see what's going on in each individual woman because she is able to understand her body, bring that cycle data to her physician. So I'm trained in interpreting that data. So a woman charts on her own, brings the data to me. As soon as she walks in the door, I have an idea of what's going on, what we're thinking of as far as diagnosis, based on her symptoms and her cycle chart, which is basically like a vital sign, right? Even the OB-GYN Society, ACOG, acknowledges that the menstrual cycle is a vital sign of a woman's health. So just like you go to a cardiologist and get an EKG, you go to an OB-GYN and you should bring them your cycle chart. And that's going to give them a ton of data to start from, to see, okay, it could be PCOS. These are the labs. These are the tests that you need. These are some things I'm thinking of. Let's go from there. And usually, even that first visit, women feel so heard and listened to. And it's so sad because they've been to 5, 6, 7 plus providers, have had multiple surgeries or procedures, are told, just do this, just do that. And so they feel like a dead end. They've hit a dead end until they come. And they just feel so relieved instantly.
Can we ask your take as a medical professional on what women have to go through when, if so, it seems like kind of the medical professions these days are sort of nudging everyone toward IVF. Like you said, it's the ABC, and there might be a lot of tentacles and reasons that doctors are kind of, the fertility industry, we would say in our organization, is a $1 billion industry that it wants customers. And so there's probably lots of incentives and different things. But when a woman, is nudged toward IVF, can you describe what you see happening to that woman's body, and like, what are the ramifications of just pushing everyone into that one track?
Sure. Yeah. Actually, the REI field, reproductive endocrinology and infertility field, which is essentially IVF, unfortunately, that was developed around the time after IVF. So it became IVF doctors, which I explained to patients, you're not going to an endocrinologist or an infertility doctor, you're going to an IVF doctor. So it's important that you understand who you're going to and what their tools are in their toolkit. We're all biased as humans. And then, of course, once you are an IVF doctor, you're going to do IVF research. And then the IVF research is only going to endorse IVF. And then so all you're going to know is IVF, so that's all you're going to teach. So I don't think it's only like financially driven. That's absolutely helping them, because then you can fund studies, and then you don't really want to look at studies that are not going to help endorse what you're doing, especially if you don't have any other tools. But there's so, because I do lead a practice that also does comprehensive women's health. So that includes obstetric care. And so we do deliver babies conceived through IVF who transferred care to us after, in the second trimester. And so that's important to know. These physicians that do these fertility treatments transfer care. They don't take care of the woman throughout the whole pregnancy. And so they don't have to deal with the messiness, to be honest, with it, which is a problem. I do. So as a fertility specialist who also delivers my own patients and watches their whole outcome, I really benefit as well from a nice, healthy delivery term and less complicated delivery. I love seeing that whole thing through, and I get to see them through the whole pregnancy, which I think is really helpful too, because you can see the outcomes. So through my training, even in my general OB-GYN training, we would get transfers, because we were a higher level of care in Illinois, and we would get transfers of patients who had done IVF, and overwhelmingly they were the highest risk. We also delivered babies of surrogates, and but the most complicated were women who were pushing, who went to IVF, probably had a lot of problems that were not addressed. Things like endometriosis or infection in the uterus, I think, is a very common one that's overlooked with IVF. And so what can happen when these conditions are not looked into is it will show up in pregnancy, right? So you skip over it, you plant a baby in a system that's not ready. It's a red flag. Infertility is a red flag of a health issue. So if you just kind of go, I'm just going to put blinders on that too. That's messy. We're not going to look into it. We're going to just have tunnel vision into a baby. That's all we want, right? That's the only outcome we want. We're not going to focus on necessarily a healthy baby, but a baby. So we have tunnel vision. We implant the embryo. It will sometimes catch up with us in the second trimester, for example, if the baby, if the embryo sticks. So in the second trimester, what I would see is, preterm labor very early. Or triplets that were threatened to be lost at 22 weeks. We saw that. And so a woman who's gone through years of trauma of infertility gets triplets, gets to 22 weeks, loses them all, right? Or gets a little longer than that, has is on bed rest for many weeks, ends up with a C-section, and the babies have some rare issues, cancers or genetic issues as well. I've seen in some of these cases. It comes out. And there is conflicting data, but definitely some studies, large reviews of like 1 million children, showing some increased risk of cancers in these children, for example. And that's not to mention, we don't know 20, 30 years down the road or future generations how this is going to be impacted through what we call epigenetics. So we see high-risk pregnancies. We see more deaths of these babies. So that's called, we quantify that in medicine and research as morbidity and mortality. So there's higher morbidity of these children conceived through IVF. And even this impacts the mothers. So the mothers have higher risk pregnancies, so higher C-sections, higher preeclampsia, especially women with PCOS or a ticking time bomb. Not only for ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome with IVF, but also with preeclampsia. If they don't have their underlying metabolic issues corrected, they develop gestational diabetes and hypertension, then preeclampsia quite often. And so, so that increases the risk of mortality or death for mothers as well. Again, it's still very small, like relative risk, overall risk. But as a nation, we've been focused on mortality. And there's a few things increasing, probably maternal mortality, and increasing or advanced maternal age, increasing dependence on IVF, and our BMI as a whole is increasing as well. Probably all of those, but we should really be looking at all of them.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So you've mentioned a couple of the conditions that women are dealing with when they end up ending up on the IVF track. Things like PCOS, endometriosis, infections in the uterus. As a restorative reproductive medicine practitioner, how do you treat those? How is that experience different than what you just described for the IVF patient?
Sure. So when they come in, we really encourage the cycle chart. The more data we have, the more individualized approach, the better the outcomes. So we encourage them to cycle chart for at least 2 cycles. We have them bring that chart to us, and we run an individualized hormone panel for that woman, including cycle day 3 labs to see. That will help us see if they have hormone conditions, including PCOS or high prolactin. Also, we'll check for hormones around ovulation and after ovulation to check for something called a luteal phase defect. The luteal phase defect is what happens after ovulation and before implantation. And so that's really important for a really healthy placenta to stick. The healthier the placenta, the healthier the hormones, the healthier the pregnancy. So that critical window is very important to be able to optimize the health of the entire pregnancy. And so we see that the first time they come in the door, we start assessing that. And then we do a full symptom screening as well. I give them an endometriosis symptom screening. And then we will check for insulin resistance and other health issues that we need to correct, thyroid, etc. And so we really want to optimize all aspects of her health. So if we see major red flags, severe pain, lots of abnormal bleeding, ultrasound findings that are abnormal, we typically do a screening ultrasound, or any other red flags that suggest surgery. Surgery is pretty common with our population. And so that can include a very thorough evaluation, including a camera in the uterus, cultures inside the uterus to see if there's anything abnormal and unhealthy inside the uterus, like polyps, infection, a septum, so an abnormal band of tissue from embryologic development. If there's a partial tubal occlusion or a complete tubal occlusion, I can correct those very easily. And unfortunately, most OB-GYNs don't know how to do that, even though it's a very easy, low-cost test, very quick for the surgeon. So I can do all that without any incisions. And then depending on our level of suspicion in our plan, we might also add a diagnostic laparoscopy. And so that's a camera into the abdomen to look for things like endometriosis and adhesions to scar tissue, or other things, tubal issues, or abnormal growths on the uterus, whether that's a fibroid or an adenomyoma or a defect from a C-section that can cause infertility. And so what I say to patients is, infertility is like a check engine light is on, and surgery is like looking under the hood of the car. When we ran our main diagnostics and we still need more data, just looking, we find usually many things. With these unexplained infertility patients, we usually find a whole laundry list of things. It's almost never just one thing.
We've talked about two. I know Katie has, our founder president, Katie Faust, has mentioned it's pretty rare that it's both like a male and female that are married. And, the definition used to be having heterosexual sex for a full year. you had to not be able to get pregnant within a year and that you could fit under the definition of infertility. And she just said it's pretty rare that it's like the woman has no eggs and the man has no sperm. Like you're actually truly, it is completely impossible for you ever to get pregnant. But it seems like we're jumping to that in kind of our culture. And like you said, there's so many of these other factors. And it sounds really neat, like the work that you're doing and specialists like you, it's a lot more investigative. It's a lot more, I like your analogy. I was curious though. I was like, do women resonate with a car check engine light analogy?
The husbands usually do.
Right.
That's for them, but yeah, I think so.
No, it's great. It does. It is helpful. It's looking under the hood, but it's investigative. You're saying we need more data and we're going to use research and the data that women themselves can provide to help you get to those underlying issues.
Yeah, and I mean, every IVF doctor is unique with their approach. And there's some that are going to do more investigations for whatever reason. Either they truly want the best outcome for their patients, which I've seen some that really do care. But there are others, like the one I trained under, who looked at their insurance plan and said, oh, IVF is covered. We're not even going to do any of that messy workup. We're just going to go straight to IVF. Or you're very wealthy. He would discriminate or base a treatment based on ability to pay. I mean, that's extremely unethical. And then you'd use scare tactics to show them that their eggs were basically falling off a cliff at age 35, which is not true. And they would be very fearful. You know, people are in a horrible place. They've gone through a lot of trauma and they're desperate. And so they're in a very vulnerable state. And to add that fear on top of it and basically imply that they just are not able to do it on their own without him. And then discriminate, or, you know, basically based on ability to pay, just a treatment plan instead of the medical needs of that person. You know, I happened to train under someone that was, to me, very questionable with ethics. And so I hope that that's more rare, but I don't know. That was just my personal experience, which definitely made me more passionate about seeking a fellowship and more training and reading more about just really helping women in this situation and helping women who happen to get under care that they may not agree with.
Now, as you've built, you know, your RRM Academy, your presence on social media, you know, you're reaching people who weren't familiar with this approach before, including, you know, potentially some IVF doctors. How has your work been received overall? Have you been hearing from people who hadn't heard about this before, found a new option that is working for them? Are you hearing from doctors who are interested in this approach who maybe hadn't been exposed to it in their medical training? And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I was really nervous because I felt like I was coming in with a completely different perspective and I would be harassed. I was worried about that. You know, I mean, I think everyone is on social media, especially if you're different. And so I'm so, you know, looking back now on when I started, I believe in 2018, 2019, I've really overwhelmingly had just such a wonderful experience and it's been extremely rewarding. And that's what keeps me going. Most people on social media are there to either get clients, get money, you know, make money. I'm there because I get these messages frequently. They're typically very long with a really sad story of their background and how many things have failed them. Either IVF has failed them or the system has failed them. So they feel like something's not right. And they're messaging me like, you know, I read something on your page or your page gives me a hope, or what if I have this, or where do I go next? So frequently I get that. And then they'll come back a few months later or a year later and say, I was able to conceive because I asked my doctor to run this test just to check for infection or whatever it is. I asked my IVF doctor to do this and I was able to conceive naturally, or whatever the story is, you know, and that keeps me going. So the vast majority of messages I get are experiences and mainly heartache. And it just makes, you know, me hurt for them and continue to advocate for them through education so they can empower themselves. That's the main point of my page. And so, but in the process, I do really want to include citations and my clinical experience, not to, again, promote me or my work, but hopefully other physicians can see the good outcomes and how rewarding it is and how happy these patients are to feel better, for example. So some may not get a baby or may not get a baby right away, but they're so happy to have answers and have healing, have improvement of their validation of their pain and symptoms, a reason for their infertility so they don't blame themselves, and hopefully a baby, which does happen quite frequently. We do have high success, but, if you read the comments, you can see women will share their story, which is just so amazing. And my page is such a great place for these women to share their stories to help others. And I'll see them helping each other in the comments, and who knows what else has happened behind the scenes, but it's a great place for women who want to advocate for themselves for a different way to be able to empower themselves, connect with other women, and support each other. And hopefully also, I try to throw in some emotional support too, to not feel desperate, to live your life. Messages that aren't on social media, right? The opposite. It's like fear tactics to get viral videos, and you can't touch this, you can't eat this, or, it's toxic and you're ruining your eggs or whatever, who knows? I'm trying to kind of bring the opposite, from fear, but hope. But yeah, I've had a couple doctors who do IVF. I've connected with them. They've asked me how to do the selective HSG tube study, or these women will message me and they're like, my doctor's never heard of this. So they'll bring the research to their doctor. So I'm hoping it's harder for me to educate physicians. Just throughout my career, I've noticed they tend to this is what the medical society tells me, and this is what I'm going to do. But hopefully with these women that can advocate for themselves, they're the ones that I think can advocate for themselves, educate the physicians, and then hopefully come back to them pregnant and saying, hey, this is what worked for me. And hopefully that their cases will speak for themselves.
Do you feel like you're seeing an uptick in fertility specialists that are more leaning the direction you're talking about, that they want to be more investigative and more holistic in care? And if you go to different conferences, and are you networking and are there more and more doctors that are sort of on that side of things? Or do you feel like you guys are you're a minority and it's hard to find each other if you're at a conference? Like, you have to be careful that you don't say it out loud or something like that?
I don't go to the fertility conferences, the IVF conferences. First, I don't do IVF, so it doesn't apply to me. And most of their research is IVF. So it's kind of this we basically all go to echo chambers, right? Like, I go to restorative fertility conferences, or I'll go to surgical conferences. So we're all in our echo chamber. We're in our surgery. My bias for surgery, I tell patients that too, right? Like, I like to fix things. I often fix things in surgery. So that's my tool. So that's my bias. But I think it's wonderful. But, I'm honest with them. And so, yeah, I'm in an echo chamber, I guess, of surgery, though. The minimally invasive gynecologic surgery conferences that I go to definitely don't focus on fertility. It's totally so in women's health, you're either an infertility patient or you're a pelvic pain patient. There's no overlap. You can't be a pain patient that has infertility. That doesn't work. So, but for me, I combine symptoms with infertility. So to me, it's very important to address both. So that's a really important thing that no one would think about, right? That doesn't make sense, but that's how, separating the pill and IVF, we separate symptoms and pain from fertility. If we address pain early on, we could likely prevent infertility. But yeah, so yeah, I go to restorative conferences, or I'll go to surgical conferences. Going to the infertility conferences typically are focused on IVF and just our IVF research. How do we change the culture media? How do we select embryos? It's just the same thing. It's just kind of like the pill. The pill's reinvented every 10 to 20 years when the patent expires. Same thing with IVF. It's like, okay, well, here we're going to how do we select, embryos, and how do we select culture media, or how many do we transfer? It's just all pretty similar research. It's just kind of boring, honestly. Again, it's just kind of the same thing, just like this pill or this IVF treatment. There's not despite what it sounds like this innovative technology. Well, it's not really going anywhere, and the success rates aren't going to really improve over time unless they start adding restorative approaches on top, which, yes, some doctors are doing that, especially when it's financially in their favor, like using PRP, which is experimental. You inject something called platelet-rich plasma, which is kind of like stem cells from your own blood into the ovaries. So they'll do things like that to kind of hopefully improve their rates of success for promotional purposes. Some of the clinics I've seen.
So, this episode is going to be at the end of this series that we've been going through, looking at IVF, talking about some of the concerns within the industry, the loss of life to embryos. But, as we talk about IVF as an organization, we do hear from a lot of people who have been told that IVF is their only option. And it's what they've turned to because they went to their doctor, they struggled with infertility for years. They're dealing with this heartbreak. So what would you say to a listener who has been told that IVF is their only option, or they've been diagnosed with, unexplained infertility and they're in this journey? What would you say to them?
Yeah, that's extremely rare that IVF would be the only option to be able to even try to conceive. And I would say IVF is actually harmful to long-term natural fertility. So if you want to try IVF and that's your plan, and then the problem is you could potentially hurt your chances of long-term fertility and conceiving naturally. And people don't realize that because they're not given, oftentimes proper informed consent. But yeah, many people who are told IVF is their only option, 20% will conceive spontaneously on their own without any treatment. So, which is, that's speaks for itself to say, okay, well, clearly they're wrong. So many times I get patients or messages of people that are told that. And it's not true. Really, and most of the time, if you still have your tubes, you still have your uterus, and you're still cycling, the doctor can't really tell you that. The doctor is not God. They don't, I tell people that all the time. I say, they want percentages, and I'm going to just be honest with them. I could be wrong. I can guesstimate. But I just remember one, she was one of my patients I accidentally cured cancer in through this type of surgery. And she also was starting to go into menopause early. Very difficult case. And I told her, I said, look, I don't want to put you through much more pain of just going through these treatments if I don't think it's going to work. She's like, just give me 6 more months. I said, okay, as long as we have kind of a end game and a plan, just give me, I was like, okay. And, to her, I would have probably given 0 to 1% chance. I didn't ever tell her that because I would never, I don't know. I tell patients that all the time. And she ended up conceiving and having a healthy girl. And so we just don't know. There are things that we don't understand, or even with premature ovarian failure or premature ovarian insufficiency, 5 to 10% of those women will spontaneously ovulate and could conceive. So that's even in the literature. So even to say that without any treatment, these women can conceive. But as long as you have tubes, IVF is likely not needed. And even if we use the male factor approach to justify the need for IVF, oftentimes we really need to find what's going on with the man. Because if they have that severe of an issue, that's a huge red flag that they have a serious health issue. And there's data to show that their life expectancy is shorter. They have higher risk of morbidity and mortality as well, because they often will have either diabetes or some other serious health issue that's showing up on the seminal fluid analysis. It takes a lot of problems to cause the sperm to be affected so much that there are red flags on the seminal fluid analysis. So I would say it's doing a disservice to couples because, like I said, I found multiple cancers. We find usually a couple a year, and women will find health issues in people that will need to be corrected, not just for fertility, but for health reasons, for better pregnancy outcomes, for a longer life. So if they do conceive or adopt, then they can have a long quality life with these children.
Yeah, that's great. You're on Instagram as NAPRO_fertility_surgeon, NAPRO, NAPRO. And what is NAPRO? Natural reproduction? Is that what that stands for?
Natural procreative technology versus
And is
artificial.
that, so as far as like a resource that someone could go find, your Instagram is great. And Patience, we were talking about, Patience had followed you and knew you for a few years. You had heard of them before us for a little bit. So that was really exciting that we've kind of crossed paths online. So that sounds like a great resource. Is there another website or just sort of a resource, even if women are saying, hey, I want to start charting my own cycle and get that going so I can go approach a fertility specialist, is there a place people can go?
Yeah, I mean, we try to organize it. My husband is my manager. He made my website, NaomiWhittaker.com, that links a lot of resources. So if you don't remember anything else, you can just go to link in bio, and it has a lot of resources. Fertilitycare.org as well is another one, to find an instructor to teach you the Creighton model system, or finding a Creighton model practitioner. Those are the teachers of the Creighton model. They can just Google them. They have, presence online, on social media, finding someone, going to the NAPRO user group on Facebook and asking them for guidance, messaging me. Hopefully that's not first line, because I get quite a few messages, but if you can't find anything else, under find a doctor highlights, on my page, there's physicians listed there and some Creighton teachers there. So there's a lot of telehealth options of Creighton teachers and doctors that do restorative medicine. At the My Catholic Doctor website as well has a list. FemHealth is another option of restorative medicine that offers telehealth services if you can't find one in the other ways. So there's a lot of options out there.
Awesome. And we'll make sure all of your bio and all of those links you just mentioned are in our show notes for people to find. Yeah. Dr. Whittaker, thanks so much for your time and your work. It's just encouraging to chat with you and to know that there is hope, that women can find hope, couples can find hope. There's a lot of resources online. There is technology and data, and it's not a hopeless thing. This feels very hopeless, I think, to so many people who struggled with it for so long. Patience, thank you for helping continuing to organize our IVF series, because we're really hoping this is beneficial for our listeners.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a key point. There is hope, and not to lose hope and not to feel desperate, because I think that's when you're in the position of needing that help and that vulnerability and that desperation, that's when patients are funneled into things that they may regret. And so I really recommend to people online to kind of have a map, a plan of what you will and what your vision board kind of is for fertility, right? Like what do you see as, you're okay with in this process ahead of time, before you're in front of that doctor saying you need this? What's the line in the sand that you're going to draw before you get in there? Because once you're in there and you're deep in the process, sometimes it's hard to look back and hard to stop the momentum. But if you have a game plan ahead of time, so I really like to emphasize that, because once you're in so deep, it gets harder and harder the longer it goes on. And I think it's harder for the resilience to be there, and for the one to be clear-minded in making those decisions.
Yeah, that's really good advice. We talk at Them Before Us. A big piece of what we're doing is trying to present the ethical questions behind a lot of the technology. We can do it. Does that mean we should do certain things? So that's some great advice, that people can go into that doctor's office with their spouse and have already agreed, this is what we will and will not do, but we want answers.
And another thing is, it's not, one person, I was on this interview and they said, some need IVF. I said, but no one needs it. It's not, they compared it to a heart transplant. I said, absolutely not. There's a very big difference between this and a heart, between IVF and a heart transplant. Someone will die without a heart transplant. You will not die without IVF. So I think that's important to say in a very empathetic way, but you don't need IVF. You feel like you need it, right? You feel like you want, but again, that might long-term hurt you financially, emotionally, physically, spiritually, especially if it goes against your faith. And then financially, if you lose all your money with it and then you can't adopt or foster after that. And then potentially hurting your long-term health or fertility and your ability to conceive naturally, for example. I really do think it could spread endometriosis. We don't really have data researching that, but the high-dose hormones that I see in the charts. So I review IVF charts when they come to me and kind of all their treatment plans and their data. They don't like to test hormones after. They try to minimize hormone draws because I don't think they want to show the estrogen over 1,000 because it's not a good look on the paper. But I'll see estrogen over 1,000, and when I do treatments, I never see it over 1,000 ever. I would have a stroke if I ever made a patient have an estrogen over 1,000. But I frequently see it when I review IUI or IVF cycles. And we do see, there's definitely a connection between high estrogen and worsening endometriosis symptoms and even potentially disease. So I've definitely found very advanced disease in women with failed IVF. If you think about it, if they have big balls of endometriosis in their ovaries, you give them high dose estrogen and you poke at their ovaries to withdraw eggs, you're going to drain that blood into the pelvis, and they stick to the bowel, to the uterus, and lead to long-term potentially health issues. So I definitely see that a lot. I really dread doing surgery on someone who failed IVF because I've seen some of the worst pelvises after that. And I'm not the only surgeon that wonders that. I've talked to others who really suspect problems related to that.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us in this episode. I really hope that it helps our listeners find some good answers as well. And I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much, Dr. Whittaker.
Of course. Yeah. If you ever think of a topic too in the future to post that would help, let me know.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Them Before Us Staff Clubhouse, the staff chat on the interview that we just heard with Dr. Naomi Whittaker. We talked about restorative reproductive medicine, or RRM, which is something I really had not heard a ton about. I've heard about all the bad things about IVF at this point. If we're, this is the final interview of our series. And so you've heard kind of the good, the bad, the ugly, the stats, the data. What was really cool about this interview, I thought, is that I thought it felt very hopeful. It felt very much like she was saying, look at all these other things we can do that help people who are struggling with infertility, instead of people getting shuffled right into a system that often makes it worse. It's not healing IVF. It's trying to circumvent it and go around. She talked about, some of the things that go on within the IVF industry actually make fertility issues even worse. But it felt very hopeful to me. What were some of your big takeaways from this episode?
So, I really appreciate, like you said, the very hopeful tone that Dr. Naomi Whittaker brings. I think, this episode, having it at the end, I think it's really important that our audience hears that perspective as well. That we're not just saying, hey, the fertility industry is bad, it's unregulated, they're doing unethical things, beware of IVF. But we're also saying, hey, there are better options. And Dr. Naomi Whittaker is just such a wealth of knowledge on restorative reproductive medicine. I've learned so much. I shared in the episode that I've followed her work for quite a while. I've learned so much from her because there aren't that many voices talking about this. There aren't that many people saying, hey, here's how the women's reproductive system actually works and how we can treat it in a way that helps it work better rather than simply circumventing and going around it. And one of the things that really struck me was her comment, I learned more in 1 hour, in my 1 hour intro to the Creighton model than in med school about the woman's cycle. And, I think that's such a disservice to women that their doctors aren't learning these things. And that there's just she described it as kind of menu-based healthcare. And I think that's not unique to the fertility industry. I think that's becoming common in a lot of areas of healthcare. But I think it is especially true when it comes to women's health, that there's kind of this short menu of options, and here's what we can do for you. We'll give you the pill. We'll give you IVF. We might try IUI and ovulation induction first, and there really isn't that push towards healing in many aspects of the industry. And so, learning about her work and what she's doing to actually help women receive healing for these health problems that they're experiencing that are interfering with their fertility, I really appreciated the episode, and I'm glad that we have that perspective in here as well.
Yeah, the that was my one of the quotes I wrote down too was I learned more about it in an hour than all of med school. But it's I think it's good probably for people to be demystified about med school a little bit. That there's a lot of things that people go to med school for, and maybe women's reproductive health isn't a course that everyone takes, and even those courses, how many of them are geared towards this huge quote unquote effective or treatment, if you want to call it that, that's IVF, and how many are really taking this alternate approach that's trying to treat underlying issues. I like that she said that a woman's cycle is a vital sign essentially. How many people say that? How many times have we heard that in your whole life? How many? I think we're probably primed for it as a country and a society right now to maybe distrust everything that big pharma has taught us, that giving our young women birth control from 13 onward is a good idea, that if we want to delay having children until our 30s and 40s, that everything is going to be fine and normal, that we can just freeze our eggs. Like, I think maybe the questioning spirit that we've developed as a country the last few years is probably a good thing in this specific regard. And then to then also take it to the extreme of what she said about there's actually a real downside to pushing a workaround if there's an underlying issue. That do you realize that if there is some problem, if there is something that needs to be fixed, and we essentially push through by overriding a system that's telling you it's not ready, that we could create a situation where a woman who is dealing with infertility, who's heartbroken, who's finally been told that this pregnancy is going to work, and they're 22 weeks in and then has to deliver early because that underlying system was not addressed properly. That's a huge disservice. Now, is it slower in some ways? Is it more costly in some ways to take time to figure out what the underlying issue is, try to address that, and then address getting pregnant? Yes. But again, as we've talked about in other episodes, it's only it's an option that is so much healthier. And when people really understand what all the other off ramps here to having a child quicker come with gigantic costs, it's only when you really add those up and you show people the health risks and the real human cost that people begin to equalize the scale and go, yeah, it's heartbreaking that this is going to be a longer path, but the other way is just unconscionable. It's fraught with risk. It's fraught with risk for me, for my babies, for all the risks, the embryos. So again, what I love about this is this kind of conversation with you just hear her talk, and she oozes credibility. I think you said, Patience, something about that this method gets associated with someone's grandmother, that it's old fashioned, that it's just the rhythm method. And so to have someone who is incredibly smart and competent talking about this, I think will do so much good, giving people confidence that I'm allowed to say the alternate is not a path I want to take, and I would care for what is going on underneath, and I want you to do the hard work of finding out what is going on with my body.
I liked that she used a term, check engine light, that infertility is actually a check engine light. It's a symptom of something going on, but it's been treated as it's the disease itself. And then to heal it, we actually just go around it and figure out some other technology that you can go produce children another way. And she says, this is a quote from her interview, surgery is like looking under the hood of the car. So it's invasive in a sense, but it's more investigative is what we talked about. When we actually investigate, she said, we usually find a whole laundry list of things. It's almost never just one issue. But she also said sometimes it requires a very simple surgery to fix the underlying issue. So I thought that was really good.
I've shared before that for us personally, we got ushered into, IVF, chose not to go that route because we got a second opinion from an endocrinologist, not an IVF doctor. And looking at the same labs, instead of a massively expensive procedure, instead of the potential to, I mean, my wife was probably, I think 27 or 28 at the time. So hyperstimulating ovary, it's 20 eggs. I mean, you're looking at 10, 15 embryos. I mean, we could have been in a situation like the IVF regret letters we get at them before us. I can think of one in particular right now who has 8 embryos and I think she's got 3 kids and now 8 embryos still, and she's in her mid 30s. We could have been that. I mean, it's one thing when you're a lot older and maybe it's 1 or 2 embryos that you can even retrieve. I feel like while there's a lot of downside, at least the risk of 10 or 12 children being perpetually frozen is at least lower. We were in that situation where we were young and fairly healthy, hadn't delayed fertility or anything, and yet they still pushed us straight down that path. Well, the endocrinologist takes that second lab or takes the same labs and says, I think you may just have a borderline clotting disorder, and let's try addressing it through a little bit of medication, and that could really fix this. And we've been fine since. Like, that is wild to me. And had we not known to go get a second opinion, had we not asked a couple questions, we could have been down a whole different route. And again, paying attention to the labs we can draw and what our bodies are telling us can often lead to, if we've got doctors that are willing to dive into it, can lead to such healthier solutions with much fewer risks.
And that's exactly one of the quotes I was going to pull up as well. She said, if you're not going to an endocrinologist or an infertility doctor, but you're going to an IVF doctor, she admits, look, we all have biases, but once you're an IVF doctor, you're doing IVF research, and IVF research endorses IVF. And she said she doesn't even go to a lot of these conferences anymore because it's just reinforcing what everyone thinks is good and right and what they should be doing anyway. There is really not a lot of space for her perspective or other perspectives to come in if you're going to kind of specifically IVF ones. And she even said she trained under someone who looked at the patient's insurance plan and saw that IVF was covered and said, then that's what we're doing. Because all this other messy workup, all these other things, investigative things we might need to do, that's not covered, or that's going to take a lot of time and pain and effort. So we're not going to do that. And I think that was a bit of a turning point for her as well, to see that you're not looking at this woman or this couple struggling as these holistic people, and maybe there's more going on. It really looked like it was about some bias and, well, let's just do what's covered financially and just kind of brush our hands of the situation. And so that was very disappointing for her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the industry has kind of hit a point where if all you have is a hammer, everything's a nail. And, there isn't a lot of awareness within the industry. Like you highlighted, there's kind of that echo chamber of, they do IVF research, they do IVF, they do more IVF research. And with my experience as well, being told, you're going to need IVF down the road, and then, pursuing NAPRO and restorative reproductive medicine and having a doctor that actually did a full workup and checked things like thyroid and blood sugar that the doctor who diagnosed me hadn't, and found a lot of issues that could be addressed pretty simply, without needing something as invasive and drastic, and threatening to the lives of embryos as IVF.
Well, and she says too, another one of her quotes is she has patients who have said to her, it's not necessarily that 100% of her patients have then, okay, great, simple fix, now you can conceive. There's still some that were not able to get pregnant. But because they looked at the underlying issues and were resolving some of those things, they at least said, I feel so much better. I feel like I understand my body. I feel validated that the things I was struggling with, it wasn't just my mind. It wasn't just you're stressed out, go on vacation, you'll be able to conceive, that sort of thing. It's still going about it in this restorative way doesn't guarantee you children, but it does guarantee you're not violating the rights of children. And it still is going to be better for the women financially, probably, hormonally, probably, their physical well-being, their emotional well-being, if they go about it in this more holistic way. So that was also, I think, really hopeful.
Well, we definitely, that quote stuck out to me, that she said something to the effect of, should we really be determining treatments on who can pay or what will get paid for? I think there's a pragmatic side to me that goes, this is why there needs to be some shift in the market here, that maybe if we do regulate IVF more, maybe there will be some incentive to invest in other technologies, because I think we can. It's not like, restorative medicine. It's not like it's learned and figured out everything that it can, and that it's done as, its rates may be, if we had spent as much time and energy on it as we had on IVF, maybe those rates would be, twice as good as they are right now. So there's part of me that goes, man, we got to figure out the incentive structure that does that. And also, you really do wish, and maybe this is through education of doctors and education of patients, you really do wish they would say, even though this is covered, do you understand these are the risks, and maybe the extra cost is worth it. Or maybe you can lobby with your employer to say, why are we only covering this part and not the other?
Yeah, her final thoughts that I think are really worth reiterating is, she said it's extremely rare that IVF is truly the only option for a woman. If you have your tubes, your uterus, and you're still cycling, your doctor cannot tell you it's impossible. I thought that was really interesting and again, kind of hopeful. And she left our audience with this advice of, you need to have a plan ahead of time, like probably you and your spouse. Know where you're drawing the line ethically before you step into any sort of fertility clinic or any situation like that, because like you guys have said, once you're in there in the moment, it feels very scary. It can feel very hopeless. You can feel very pressured to just kind of move along with things that maybe you wouldn't ultimately agree to.
It occurs to me the number of couples that are having to make these decisions devoid of any of the institutions that they have in their life to be educated on this. So how many pastors know all of this? So that when we're talking about one of the biggest ethical decisions, in some ways, I hope you never have to make life and death decisions like that. And people don't realize they're life and death decisions. But when you do, then listen to stuff like this that we've produced, and then you realize I'm going into a real, potentially life or death ethical quandary. Why would you not have a pastor to be able to talk you through what's right and wrong? Well, if your pastor has no clue the difference between IUI, IVF, restorative medicine, any of that, huge issue. You need to send this to them. Again, technology has challenged our beliefs. Technology changes every day, and our character has to catch up to compete. We have to update our apologetics on this issue. And if your pastor doesn't know these things, how are we really applying this ethic of life and the value of every life and the value from conception that every life's created in the image of God? How are we applying that in today's world where the threats to that life look very different? I think there's a lot of pastors who felt very strongly about being pro-life, and they understand that to be, the battlefield to be at the abortion clinic or on that sidewalk into the abortion clinic, and they haven't thought well about what fertility, the baby making industry looks like, and how the battle lines have been redrawn here, and they need to shift. And so again, if you're listening to this and your pastor doesn't know anything about this, or you're a business owner and you have no clue what your business offers, you can email us at thembeforeus.com. We would love to help, whether it's a business owner, a church leader, a nonprofit leader, will help. But also send somebody this. We hope that it's formatted in a way that you can send to people at all ranges of the spectrum, people who may be struggling, but people who have regret. We hope it's hopeful, but again, education is our way out of this. I feel so convicted of that after going through this.
Yeah, well, this is the wrap up, a big series. Huge shout out and thank you to Patience, who is our engagement director, and Josh Wood, who's been on with us, is our executive director. But Patience really was a person doing a lot of the research and prep and finding all these incredible guests that you've been able to hear from in all this series. So thank you so much, Patience, for all your hard work and getting this out to people.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Jen, for all the work that you've done in editing and making it available to our audience. I think this is going to be a really valuable tool. And like Josh said, it can serve churches, individuals who are considering fertility options. companies that are working through, hey, what's covered, what should be, what shouldn't be. And I hope that this series does give people tools for thinking through what lines they should and should not cross as they're considering their own options or helping people close to them think through these issues.
If anything you've heard from this series or anything from thembeforeus.com, our resources, our book, our podcast has helped you in any way, has shaped your thinking, has made a difference for you, would you consider partnering with us? We can only do this as a job. This is the best job ever. And we can only do this as a job because of folks like you who support us. We have people who donate monthly. We have people who donate big gifts once a year or who come to a virtual event or an in-person event. And if this has made a difference for you, will you help support us? Because we feel like we're just getting started. We just have 5 staff as of 2024. We are just going to blow up and keep going, and you can be a part of it. We really think we're changing the world for children's rights, and we would love you to join us. So if you like this series and anything we do at Them Before Us has made a difference for you, we hope you'll consider partnering with us. You can go to thembeforeus.com, make a donation, join us, and we would really appreciate it. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to this series. Like Josh said, we want to hear from you, questions, comments. But yeah, we'd love you to share this to people who need to hear about it as well. And yeah, thanks so much for listening. Thanks everyone for joining the Them Before Us movement.